What is going on, IVE Warriors? It's your boy Edward V, and today we're going to talk about a very interesting study. It's a study that looked at a large group of people, over 2,000 people, and the study indicated that fasting, the common denominator of fasting, actually improved health and improved cardiac health, heart health over the course of 4.5 years. So for those who say, well, if you're entering this diet, beware, there aren't any long-term studies, this is an incredibly long-term study, and I'm gonna go ahead and talk about that study in this video. Stay tuned. Quickly, before we start, this video is brought to you by yours truly, Fledge Fitness and the Fledge Fitness Jump Rope. If you haven't gotten your Fledge Fitness Jump Rope with its aluminum handle and ergonomic design, and especially the swivel design that makes it an incredibly fast speed rope, what are you waiting for? The link will be down in the description or in the top right-hand corner. Get them while they still last. And of course, thank you for your support. Now let's go ahead and jump right into the video. Now, this study was an actual epidemiology study. Epidemiology studies aren't as strong, obviously, as control studies, or, for example, the strongest that you can have is a meta-analysis study. They're informational and they're data, so it's something that is important to look at. And the reason why there's a place for things like epidemiology studies is because they can do things that are unique from control studies, for example, because control studies, you actually have to get the participants in for a specific study parameter to understand exactly what the mechanisms are that can trigger something. So you set up everything. Everything is set up to a T. But when you do that, you have to compensate the participants. So you can't really hold them for 4 years in a study. It's not practical because it's not based on their lifestyle. It's something that is incredibly difficult to tell someone, hey, do this specific routine every day or every week for 4.5 years for this study. You're going to have a massive dropout rate, and then the data is going to be for nothing anyways. So it's harder to do things like 4.5 years with a control study. It's harder to have over 2,000 people, which this study had, within a course of 4.5 years. So it's a big sample size and a large time frame. These things can only happen with stuff like cohort studies and epidemiology studies, where you're observing someone's lifestyle. You're not really interjecting, but you are selecting certain people that have a specific lifestyle and then analyzing them over the course of 4.5 years. And that is what happened with this study. So recently at the annual American Heart Association meeting, there was a group of people at a panel who released information regarding a study that is soon to be published. Now, the study is not published, so I can only link you to an article that is referencing this moment where they're speaking about the study. So that isn't out yet, but you could rest assured once it is out, once it goes through the peer review, I'll put it in my community tab where you can go ahead and look at it for yourself. But I will link the article down below so you can go ahead and take a look at that if you want. Let's go ahead and talk about what they mentioned regarding this study. Now, this data was collected from people who had cardiac catheterization. And if you don't know what that is, it is simply a catheter that's placed in the heart. Normally when you have heart issues, a heart attack, you can have that. If you have clogged arteries, when you are experiencing heart problems, they normally insert a catheter to help the arteries. Now, this can be done through the arm, through the neck, through the groin. They basically just thread it through that blood vein all the way up into the heart, and they can place it there. It's amazing how they can do this through this surgical procedure. They can reduce the invasiveness as much as possible and still connect a catheter to the heart artery. Now, they took all of these patients that had this cardiac catheterization inside, and then they took 2,000 of them. They looked at them over the course of 4.5 years. Now, they asked people if they fasted, if they did routine fasting, which was like intermittent fasting, or some people did fasting for religious purposes. So they had that data point. So if they fasted, if they did routine fasting, but utilizing an intermittent fasting protocol, so no more than 24 hours, then they looked at what was different between that group and everyone else. They realized that after the 4.5 years and overlooking this entire group of people of 2,000 2,000 people that heart risk and heart ailments and heart problems and deaths were reduced substantially in those who fasted versus those who did not do routine fasting. And this is pretty good indicator. Now, of course, they had to do other studies to look at what's the actual trigger or the mechanism that happens, but they saw interesting things within this study alone. They noticed that fasting was a strong pedigree for survival, and even after adjusting for things like smoking or bad habits or bad health habits, other poor lifestyle behaviors, they actually accounted for all of these things and adjusted for all of those things, and fasting was still shown to be a strong pedigree for survival in those who had the cardiac catheterization. They noticed that red blood cell counts were positive, were changed in a positive way, were increased for those who were doing the fasting protocol. Interjecting a fasting routine every week over the course of multiple years, they noticed that it conditioned the body to activate health benefits much quicker than usual. The body becomes much more adept to switching over to this healthier state and helping your body fix certain ailments, certain inflammation problems, certain heart and health problems when you are constantly utilizing a fasting protocol over the course of 4.5 years. Now, this is a great epidemiology study because it's a study that looks at long-term fasting. One thing that a lot of people like to hang their hat on when they're talking about why you shouldn't do intermittent fasting is that there aren't any long-term studies. Well, you can't really get longer term than 4.5 years. That is an incredible amount of time. And then the sample size being 2,000 people, that makes it even more of an important thing. Now, of course, these are things that can outline or can give an overview of where we should go, what's the direction to go in when you're doing these studies to look at the health benefits or the negative benefits of intermittent fasting. What's the guiding light? Now, because this is obviously not a control study and it's not a meta-analysis of multiple studies put together, this is just an epidemiology study. It still carries importance because of the data, but it also helps to bring us closer to what we actually need to do to create a better study or a more focused study on trying to figure out the mechanisms that can trigger these kinds of health situations where it's increasing survival. And of course, there are certain things that you can't really replicate. For example, someone dying or someone passing away, you can't really create a control study for that to see, hey, well, let's do this and let's do that and let's see if you die doing this or let's see if you live doing that. Obviously, that is completely unethical and just would never happen, and no one would want that to happen. So stepping back, just looking at a bunch of people living their lives and doing specific things that are similar. Of course, this doesn't automatically say that fasting is what triggered it, but fasting is the common denominator in all of these patients that had a higher survival rate. So I wanted to share this study and this finding because the results of this is pretty important, because now we can start to create better conversations towards moving us away from the stigmatization of fasting and closer to actually looking at fasting as a means to help people for not just weight loss, but also for health purposes. There are so many studies, even control studies that are coming out looking and focusing more on the health benefits that are unique to intermittent fasting, that trigger because you get into this post-absorptive range at a consistent basis when you're in a fasted state. So it's important that we're continuing this conversation, that the medical field is looking into things like this. I mean, the American Heart Association isn't the most gung-ho about, intermittent fasting, but they're open to giving people the platform to talk about the research. If it's in research, if it exists, then they're giving them that platform to talk about it, and I commend them. And like I said, this is a pretty eye-opening study, and I hope that this lends to more information in the future. Of course, I would love to see the study release and just look at every single factor. That is one of the things that I love to do, and I will share that with you guys as soon as the study drops. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that information, and of course, I want to thank my patrons for my Patreon, and I'm going to go ahead and put their names right up here. And of course, as always guys, I'll see you on Sunday for another FAQ. Peace!